Does Rai ever get her memories back in the last sunrise? Ending explained. Hello everyone, today we're going to answer one of the biggest questions from the last sunrise. Does Rai ever get her memories back after the surgery? Before we continue, here's your spoiler alert. We're going straight into the ending, Rai's surgery, her memories, and what that final moment with Julian really tells us. So, does Rai get her memories back? The movie strongly suggests that her memories are returning, but it never confirms that she gets every single memory back. That's an important distinction. Rai undergoes the surgery because her medical condition has become too dangerous to ignore. But before the operation, she's terrified of one particular possibility, that the surgery could damage her memory. And for Rai, this isn't just about forgetting random details. She's afraid of losing the memories that define her life, especially the memories of Julian and everything they experienced together. That's why the surgery is such an emotional turning point. Julian knows how frightened she is, but he also understands that keeping Rai alive has to come first. After the operation, Rai survives. And then the movie gives us its biggest clue about her memory. Rai explains through her voiceover that her memories are coming back to her one by one. That line is extremely important. It tells us that her memory hasn't simply disappeared forever. Instead, she's experiencing a gradual process of remembering. She may not wake up and suddenly remember everything. She may remember certain moments first, a place, a face, a feeling, a conversation, and eventually those individual pieces could connect. That's why the final scene with Julian is left deliberately ambiguous. Julian approaches Rai and introduces himself again. At first, this makes it look like Rai has completely forgotten him, but that's not necessarily what the movie is telling us. Julian could be introducing himself because he knows Rai's memory is still uncertain, or he could simply be recreating the moment when they first met. And there's something incredibly meaningful about that. When Rai first met Julian, they were strangers. She didn't know his story, she didn't know how important he would become. Their relationship developed naturally. So when Julian says his name again, it's almost like he's giving Rai permission to start over. He isn't demanding that she remember him. He's saying, in effect, I'm still here. And that makes the ending much more hopeful. If Rai remembers him later, they can continue their relationship. If she doesn't, Julian is willing to create new memories with her. And if the memories are already beginning to return, then there's a strong possibility that Julian himself could eventually trigger more of them. The movie doesn't show us that process. It ends before we get a definitive answer. And that's intentional. The filmmakers could have shown Rai immediately saying Julian's name. They could have shown a flashback proving that she remembered everything. But instead, they leave us with uncertainty. That uncertainty fits the larger message of the movie. Rai can't control everything that happens to her. She can't control her illness. She can't control exactly how the surgery affects her. And she can't force her memories to return on command. But she can continue living. That's what changes by the end. Earlier, Rai is constantly worried about losing things. She's afraid of losing her health. She's afraid of losing her freedom. She's afraid of losing her memories. And she's terrified that she could lose Julian. But after the surgery, she has something much more important. She has time. She has another opportunity to experience life. And she has the possibility of recovering the memories she thought were gone. That's also why the sunrise becomes so important. The movie begins by making us think about a final sunrise. Rai is afraid that her illness could mean she doesn't have many more beautiful mornings left. But by the ending, the sunrise represents a new beginning. Rai survived. She's alive. And her memories may still be returning. So the final sunrise isn't a symbol of everything Rai has lost. It's a symbol of everything she can still experience. And that includes Julian. There's also an interesting difference between the movie and the original story. In Anna Todd's novel, the resolution is more straightforward. Rai ultimately remembers Julian, and the story provides a clearer indication of what happens to their relationship after the surgery. The movie chooses a more open-ended approach. That means we shouldn't assume the movie is confirming that Rai remembers everything immediately. Instead, we're meant to focus on the possibility that her memories are gradually returning. And that's arguably more fitting for the movie's themes. Memory isn't simply a switch that's either on or off. For Rai, remembering can be a journey, and the final scene leaves her at the beginning of that journey. Maybe the next memory she gets is Julian. Maybe it's the beach. Maybe it's the first time they spoke. Maybe it's the feeling of being with him. And eventually, all those fragments could become one complete story again. But even if they don't, Julian's response tells us something important. He's not leaving. He's willing to meet Rai where she is. He's willing to introduce himself again. He's willing to give her another chance. That's why his final words aren't necessarily tragic. They're hopeful. He's essentially opening the door to another beginning. So, does Rai ever get her memories back? The movie suggests that she does begin recovering them, but it doesn't confirm that she eventually remembers absolutely everything. What we know is that her memories are returning gradually. What we don't know is exactly how far that process goes after the movie ends. And that unanswered question is deliberate. The movie wants us to imagine what happens next. Maybe Rai eventually remembers Julian completely. Maybe some memories remain missing. Maybe she remembers the emotions more strongly than the details. But the important thing is that her life continues. She doesn't die. She isn't permanently trapped in a state where she can't remember anything. She has survived, and she has the opportunity to create new memories. And that brings us back to the meaning of the final sunrise. It represents a second chance. Rai thought she might be reaching the end of her story. Instead, she's given another beginning. And Julian is there, ready to be part of it. Whether Rai remembers their past immediately or has to discover him all over again. So the movie's final message isn't really Rai forgot Julian. It's much more hopeful than that. It's Rai has another chance to remember, another chance to live, and another chance to love. And sometimes a new beginning is more important than having every piece of the past perfectly restored.
And that is why the final scene doesn't feel like a complete loss. Even if Rai's memories aren't fully restored, the movie suggests that the emotional connection she had with Julian may still matter. Memory can disappear in pieces, but feelings can be more complicated. Rai may not immediately remember every conversation or every moment they shared, but she can still experience that same sense of familiarity when she's around him. And Julian understands that. He isn't trying to force the past back into her mind. He's willing to let the future happen naturally. So whether Rai eventually remembers everything or only recovers certain memories, her story doesn't end with forgetting. It continues with the possibility of remembering and the possibility of creating something new.